Hello and welcome to ICANplanet.com. I'm Matthew Stevens, and thank you very much for spending the time to tune in with us tonight. Today we have an incredible scholar on board with us, Michael Tsarion. He's a preeminent researcher and independent scholar of the highest caliber in the subjects of the arcane mysteries and the occult history of the world. He has written several books and has produced DVDs, The Architects of Control, and also the fantastic series Origins and Oracles, all of which are available from his website, michaeltsarion.com. Michael, it's a great pleasure of mine to have you with us. Welcome to the show, mate.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Matthew, and thanks for inviting me.
No problem. Akhenaton, Michael, first of all, can we start with a bit of background on him? You know, in terms of kind of his heritage, who he was, and when it was that he reigned and whatnot.
Well, he was reigning about 1400 years BC in what Egyptologists refer to as the 18th dynasty. And he was the husband of Nefertiti. He was he was in the line of the Thutmose pharaohs. His real name was Amenhotep IV, and that meant that his father was Amenhotep III. His mother was Queen Tai, and allegedly his son was Tutankhamun. Almost everything I'm saying is somewhat open to future rectification because, you know, people know so little about these details. A lot of people have thought, you know, for instance, that Tutankhamun may have been his brother and all of this kind of thing.
Right.
So again, everything is subject to revision as time goes by. His uncle was the famous Aya, who became a pharaoh at a later date, you see. And it's his grandparents that were extremely important in the history of that period. Again, I say Queen Tai and or Yuya, that a lot of people think is the biblical Joseph. So him and his family basically were very important. But the most important thing that jumps out is that he was the man who decided to change the theology of Egypt, and really to do it radically. And it didn't just mean introducing another church or another theology, which had been done a lot. Egypt was a very egalitarian country and very permissive when it came to worships of gods and religions. They were pantheistic, and therefore it would have been very easy for him to set up a sun cult. There already was several sun cults, some of them almost identical to the one that he subsequently created, which was Atonism. It's very similar to what was taught in Heliopolis, and in fact I tend to believe that he either was himself a priest of Heliopolis, or these priests in Heliopolis, these priests of the sun, were a faction of them were behind him. It wasn't just him alone.
Right. He
was actually working with particular, cults. But instead of doing that, instead of just adding another cult to what was there already, he established his church and then mercilessly and ruthlessly suppressed every other belief system in Egypt. And then this, of course, constituted not only a change in the history of Egypt as a country, it actually impacted the history of the world. And we cannot understand the days we're living in today unless we understand his changes. People can either believe me, that it was a terrible, terrible travesty, or like 98% of the rest of the scholars of the world, they all believe it was a good thing. He's considered the Christ before the Christ, the light, the holy light, an inspired leader, a great man who tried to get rid of all this evil paganism. Most people think of him as the great Sun King of Egypt, who was sort of a precursor to the creator of monotheism, and certainly a precursor to even the Christian Judaic kind of monotheism, all of this nonsense. He's looked at as in a very, very he's lionized. He's looked at it in a very positive way. I'm one of two scholars in the world that really doesn't take that attitude at all.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. I have looked at a little bit of your research on this and listened to previous interviews with Henrik Palmgren, and you went a little bit into the actual cult of light itself and the fact that it's deeply rooted in the metaphysical world as well also, Michael.
Oh, absolutely. Of course, that has to be stated every time, that there was no flippancy in the creation of these cults. Atonism, even though it was an aberration, as I said, it had roots in much earlier traditions. In fact, the name Aton does precede Akhenaton. One of his fathers, I think 3 generations back or 2 generations, I really can't remember, one of his grandfathers worshipped Aton. What we have to understand about Egypt is that Egypt's life was very much, the life of the Egyptian people and the priests was very much divided into the secular world and the world of the priests, the hieratic.
Right.
And what that meant was that you had tutelary deities, gods, goddesses, and deities that were commonly worshipped by the masses of people, in the same way that all religion has. Judaism has an esoteric hidden side that only the priests, that's called the Kabbalistic schools, they acknowledge. Any rabbi will openly acknowledge that they have that as one of the 5th secret levels, whereas they have lower levels for the ordinary person to matriculate. And so this division between the public worship, at that time the god Amun, Ra, was the public god. All Egyptians worshipped Amun Ra. This was just accepted. However, different families and different priests and different individuals could have what was known as a private god. They could have a private worship of their particular chosen god. This was accepted. This was no problem.
Really?
And yeah, so Aton was one of many, many gods that was worshipped in private, as I said, by at least one of Akhenaton's ancestors, predecessors, probably worshipped by certain coterie in a private way, not public. And what Akhenaton did is decided, look, I'm done with Ra, I'm done with Amun. We're going to end all of this, and we're going to make our private family god the main god of the entire country. Now, people were just going boogaloo about this because it had never happened before. It was an act of unbelievable, unmitigated tyranny, of suppression which the likes Egypt had never known, couldn't grasp at all, and really didn't know what to do with. And they couldn't also believe, you see, because the pharaoh ostensibly is meant to be the high priest of the country. He's meant to be in tune with what the psyche of the country is. He's their head boy. He's their head man. He's their link between God and them. So they had an additional problem of wondering what in the hell is wrong with this guy who is so out of tune with us that he's treating us as foreign. And of course, this led some scholars to believe, including myself, that that's because Akhenaton himself was foreign. He treated the Egyptian people in this despicable way because he himself was not truly of Egyptian blood. As I say, this is not 100% provable, but the treatment of Egypt and various other things in his life, like where he spent his youth, for instance, that would correspond to what in the Bible is called the land of Goshen. I believe it's the eastern delta. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure it's the eastern delta is where he spent his time, close to cities that were occupied by what would now be called the Hebrews or the proto-Jews.
Right.
And so he grew up amongst these people. There's speculation that these grandparents I'm speaking about were full-blown Jews, and therefore there's a rumor, there's several pieces of evidence that lead people to believe that he really wasn't of the Egyptian blood. And I deal with that in the book, and we go into that theory, and see where that kind of leads. It would answer a lot of questions. It would answer a lot.
Yeah, I mean, there is also a misconception, isn't there, with regards to, the Jews, Michael, in that the biblical Jews, people perceive them kind of under the belief that they are the ancestors, of the modern-day religious Jews, when in fact, as you've highlighted, the biblical Jews were in fact very much tied in with these Atonists that you speak about, Michael. That's right, and they're not the only ones, of course. But there's been a play of words. There's been a historical misconstruement. Partly the Jews are to blame for that because they know very little about their own history in the same way that Christians know very little about their history and how it relates to paganism. Any of the Jews who knew the truth and tried to speak up were immediately silenced. Zionism is a form of Atonism, a political wing of Atonism that poses
in order to operate in the world, there's been a smokescreen created. So what we know today as modern Protestantism, Catholicism, Islam, and Judaism are basically fronts. They're basically a camouflage, hodgepodges, thrown together quite hastily in more recent times, historically, so that this atonism can work behind them in the same way that it works behind the Templars and the Rosicrucians and the Knights of Malta and the Freemasons. Atonism, I've gone into this in so much detail in the books, you see, operates indirectly because they have their own enemies. They're worried about infighting, and they're also they have a big plan. The plan is the conquest of the earth, and they know that that can't be done under a single flag where they can be identified. So these people have learned to be surreptitious from the fall of Akhenaton. When the fall of Akhenaton taught them such a big lesson, and in their mind's eye, just like in the James Bond movie, the world is not enough. That actual term, the world is not enough, is actually a Freemasonic motto, and it is absolutely, I believe, originates with the megalomaniacal ambitions of either Akhenaton himself after his fall, or given that he died early, his immediate descendants decided that, look, if we've lost the Nile, which was, of course, the most civilized place on earth at that time, if we've lost this, nothing will replace it but the conquest of the entire planet. Rome is not enough. They had many friends in Rome. Atonists were well set up in Greece and Rome, but the elite Egyptians of Akhenaton's descendants merely going and as house guests to distant relatives, even though they may have been ideologically on the same page, turning up with their bags in hand, so to speak, at the door of their Roman patrician friends and Greek friends was not the order of the day. These were elites. These were absolutely the top people in the world, and they're not going to, accept guest rooms in the houses of their lower level mates. They might have done that temporarily. So these people wanted complete dominion, and their idea was that if we can't have Egypt, then the only way to replace that is to have complete domination of the world. And my book tries to go into the fact that then I know where their next headquarters was. Their next headquarters was actually the British Isles.
Right.
And from there, they not only conceived Christianity, we know that Christianity was born in the Middle East, but that's not where it was conceived. Atonism, or what we know today, going back to your original point, Matthew, was that the Judaisms that we know today, in fact, the Judeo-Christianity we know today, is an Egyptoid/Atonism, conceived in Britain, by the way, and then transplanted, because it also had a mercantile side. This was an imperial religion that was going to help galvanize markets and colonize the world. You can't do that from Little Britain, so they sent their agents, people who were already long ensconced in those lands, closer to the Mediterranean. So the people who propounded Judeo-Christianity did it in the Middle East, but it actually had been conceived in the far west, and it was very much elements of Druidism, plagiarized Druidism, that animated it. And so that's why today you have in Christianity unbelievable pagan motifs, many Druidic motifs, and many people who haven't done their homework blame Druidism as if it is also culpable in some sort of conspiratorial sense. No. The Druids were one of the first people wiped out by these Atonists upon their arrival in Ireland, and their teachings were stolen. So let's identify the criminal. The work of the Druids was for all of mankind. The work of the Atonists was for their own dominion, you see, over the rest of the world. And the unfolding of history, as I see it, is conspiratorial and very much has these Atonists and their symbolism throughout the world. But again, as I say, they cloaked it in a pseudo-Judaic form, so that if anyone was to become savvy to any of this, they'd be immediately down all these cul-de-sacs, and it would be labyrinthine, because the symbols are apparently Jewish, but they're actually Judaic. And there's a world of difference between Jewish, when you talk about the religious man. That word wasn't even created until the 1800s, Jew, and Judaic, which is a very ancient term, and it relates not to a race, but to a sect, to a cult.
Right.
And anybody from any religion could be members of that cult. There were Scythians, they could have been Syrians, they could have been Sudanese, they could have been African, they could be white, they could be Cretans. And this is a worldwide solar cult. And solar cultism can be found in India, southern and northern, China, India, Ireland, Norway, Sweden. Everywhere you go, you find solar cultism. Race has nothing to do with it whatsoever. It has to do with caste and creed and cult. Nothing at all to do with race. And the people who say that it has to do with race are these mythmongers and deceivers who try to lead you off in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I mean, Michael, you know the Hyksos themselves. I think you mentioned it was the 13th dynasty that they actually invaded Egypt.
Yeah.
And then was it that their reign was then on to the 18th dynasty also? Yeah.
Yeah, the very first pharaoh of the beginning of the 18th dynasty kicked them out, or let's say they had wars, and this great pharaoh Ahmose, meaning the moon. Right. The god, pharaoh of the moon. Mos means basically son, like Moses.
Right.
Son of the moon, right? He confronted them and said, "We've had enough of these tyrants." And some scholars say it was an all-out fight. Okay. Others say it was a fight, but then ended with an agreement that the Hyksos would leave. So some people, we don't know if the Hyksos. Some documents looked like it was an agreement with the pharaoh that we will now leave because we know we're not wanted and we're going to leave. And if you give us all the treasures we want, we'll depart in good faith and get out of here. And that's one strong theory. I think it was the true case. Others in the earlier years, before the Ralph Ellis's, before the last scholarship that's been done, thought it was an all-out bloody battle and that the Hyksos were forced to leave. These are, again, minor points. The fact is, yes, they departed during or weakened. But you see, what I think is this. You may have the mass of the ordinary people being exiled to another region of Egypt, but the elites who are already ensconced as priests, high-level Hyksos, high-level bloodline Hyksos, they're not just going to up and leave because these are people that are now embedded in the business, not only the business areas but the government and the civil. You see, you're going to have this coterie that might not go with the new status quo, but they're still ensconced. Yeah. And I believe that this was the case. That's why the Atonism has a Hyksos slant to it, because I don't think all the Hyksos were thrown out. I don't think they could have been. You see. Yeah, so there's still a connection there. And since there's so much suppression of knowledge and suppression of books about this particular epoch, it's very difficult to put the pieces together. It's taken me the best years of 20 years of constant research to even get to the knowledge I have now about it. And even that is probably, subject to a lot of alteration down the line.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've uncovered a lot, Michael. It really is fantastic, the work you have done, especially for, we're quite new to this alternative research movement ourselves, and it's people like yourself who really have set a benchmark for us, you see, which is fantastic. Michael, if we can look at maybe possibly the lineage of these Hyksos warriors in terms of, do you trace them back to Atlantis?
Well, ultimately, of course, it all comes from Atlantis, because, or not just Atlantis, but the whole how many continents there may have been, the whole pre-Diluvian setup, in which one has to entertain the idea that in ancient history there were sophisticated civilizations. I know that's a difficult one for most people to take. There is a certain amount of proof proving it, but until it's something that nobody can really be sure of. You can only speculate. Yeah. But the point being that if you do take it on board, then the evidence shows you that when those Western civilizations declined, the civilization from those places, the remnants of it, the ancient books are telling you that it came to Britain, just like it did when it went further west, it arrived in Mexico, like those ancient books say. Well, closer to Europe, it arrived in Britain and got transplanted then throughout the rest of the lands. That implies that these Hyksos, see, in my reading of it, the Hyksos people, Hyksos just means shepherd kings.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And shepherd is an allusion to the stars, by the way, not the sheep. Shepherd is an esoteric code word. All the pharaohs were known as the shepherds of their people. Jesus Christ was portrayed as the shepherd of his people. Shepherd is an allusion to a magus, a magi, an astrologer king. So so in my work, and this is going by Annals of Ireland, by the way, and also the Annals of Ancient Scotland, to go a long way to explaining who these people were. These were originally people, in my belief, the Hyksos are the famous Scythian warriors that people believe, scholars believe, originated in the Ukraine area, and that's not true, although that was one of their districts. The Scythians were actually displaced from Britain during the cataclysms, the ancient cataclysms that destroyed the ancient Atlantis and the pre-Diluvian continents. That cataclysm didn't just start and then finish. There was waves of cataclysm. Okay, granted, a little bit less devastating, but the Northwest was wrecked even as late as 3,000 years ago, 3,000 years BC, I mean, by very severe famines and droughts and tsunamis and stuff. So there was tremendous cataclysm there, and what it meant was that as long ago as 10,000 years, the same period of time when the Indus Valley rivers dried up. So and now they photographed that from satellite. So what we're talking about is absolutely confirmed. The same type of natural phenomena, the desertification, the drying up of rivers, the terrible droughts and the famines that affected not only Mycenae, Egypt. Egypt was wrecked by a famine, by the way, at exactly the time of Nefertiti. Out of 6 of their daughters, I think 3 died of famine, or 4 died of famine.
Right.
A great famine. And then there was the eruption of Mount Thera in the island of Santorini. We have the Bronze Age drought and Bronze Age famine in Britain. We have the Storegga tsunami, which happened in northern Norway. And we have various other cataclysms all happening somewhat contemporaneously. So the world was wrecked.
Yeah.
And then the famous disasters of the northern India, in which the entire Saraswati River, one of the biggest rivers ever known in history, completely dried up, leaving millions of people, giant communities, completely wiped out. They're now digging them up, so they know that it wasn't just a handful of people. There was literally millions of people lived in the northern India, places which were always spoken of in ancient legends as being one of the cradles of civilization. Well, Britain went through the even worse devastation. And this, of course, what happened is that the peoples had to vacate. So I positioned the Scythians, just like Commons Beaumont did, the great scholar, in northern Scotland and Britain. That was their homeland. Only under that guise, they were known as the Phoenicians. As I say, there's been a big deception, so we have a false understanding of all of these people. But the original Phoenicians lived in Scotland, if you can believe it. And at that time, there was a land bridge that connected the northern Scotland to Scandinavia, so there was no difference. There wasn't a Scotland like we know it today, and a Norway and a Sweden. They were all one land, all one mass of a land that, through the devastations you see, got split. This has been proven by the top brass now in geology in Norway. Professor Ulf Erlingsson has done the research to show that those land bridges existed, and there is no higher up the totem pole than him. So these people have shown that the devastation wrecked these lands and sunk these land bridges. So of course, when you don't see the actual topography, you see what you see now with oceans and seas in between. People like me come along and say things, and people don't believe it because they don't know the facts, or they don't want to know the facts. I found out the facts not from geology, but from mythology. The myths are telling you, and I always took the myths and legend basically as anyone else would take facts. Now, to answer your question, though, I believe that those Scythians originally, their own ancestors, as the Irish legends say, came from Britain and Ireland originally, were displaced to the continent of Europe because they had to find shelter to live in, their people, and moved down through the Scandinavia and into the Russia and into the Ukraine, which is now where certain scholars will tacitly admit they came from. Now, these people were horseback riding people, and they were able to go into Palestine, where names of the Scythians still exist today. There's a city called Scythopolis, and many of the other cities in Egypt itself are officially known to be Phoenician/Scythian settlements. This is official. So we know that the Scythians were there. And although no one else has drawn the conclusion, I draw the conclusion that the Proto-Atenists and the Hyksos dynasty were probably Scythians.
Right.
In exactly the same way that the Irish legends say that the Scythians went as mercenaries to help a certain king, and the dates are very close to when Akhenaton reigned. And they say that the Scythian leaders went and became mercenaries to help a certain king, a solar-type king, to fight off the pagans. This is what the ancient Irish legends speak about. They were first translated into English in the 1600s, but they date from many hundred years before that.
I see.
And they're telling you something there, that the Scythians went, and because they had great intellectual affiliation and even mercantile affiliation and perhaps even bloodline affiliation with these certain kings who were fighting the pagan rivals, And when they won the war, the pharaoh turned around and gave bounty onto these Scythians. Said, you will become princes of the land. I'm going to give you land, and you can take any wives. And this is Irish legends talking about this. Then you add to that, in an Allen fort in Northern Ireland, you're finding Barbary apes buried that you can only find in Egypt. These apes. There's mentions of specific little tombs, like Ardmaka. It's a famous tomb of a queen up in Northern Ireland, near County Armagh. You find references to those places in Egyptian papyrus.
Really?
Yep. And vice versa, in Irish documents, you find mention of connections to Egypt, names, and so on. And then when you dig even deeper, you start finding that there's even Egyptian kings.
Yeah.
From a lot further back than when Akhenaton was born. And there's even the story, which is central to Scottish and Irish legends, that Princess Scota, from which Scotland gets its name, who is a daughter of Akhenaton and Nefertiti, is buried in County Kerry in Northern Ireland.
Gosh.
You see, this kind of stuff starts coming up. Then recently, in the last 10 years, an archaeologist by the name of Lorraine Evans, who specializes in digs, start digging up Egyptian beads and boats in England and in Scotland, in Ireland as well, digging up Egyptian beads only made there in the world.
Yeah.
Then in the tomb of Tutankhamun, you find torques. These are sort of bracelets that are in the Celtic design, the so-called Celtic design of Ireland, only made like that in Ireland by the so-called Celts. I would more correctly say Gaels. You find hundreds of them, not 10, not 20. They say that I think there was up to like 70 or more torques. And there was more because the tomb of Tutankhamun was raided by the agents of the Rothschilds long before it was open to the public. So if the public, after it was open to the public and they say, we found 70 bizarre torques, you can damn well bet there was many, many more, but they had been taken out. Because the tomb was robbed. The tomb was robbed not by grave robbers, like they want to tell you.
Yeah.
Actually by official agents working for the Rothschild dynasty who were in charge of the rape of most of the tombs, especially the tombs of the 18th. Well, of course, I'm telling you that they're the descendants of these people.
Yeah.
If not biologically, then certainly ideologically. And the last thing they want the world to know is what's in those tombs. Did you know that in the tomb of Tutankhamun, there's a couple of statues there, big, giant statues. And, of course, these statues wear a very Masonic-looking apron.
Okay.
If you actually compare Masonic aprons to the aprons of the Egyptian, as you see them in these hieroglyphics, you'll notice some very strange similarities.
Yeah.
Well, in one or two of these big megalithic statues, monolithic statues that was in the tomb of Tutankhamun, it was hollow. The apron was hollow, made out of wood, of course, or some said type of clay or plaster, I don't remember.
Yeah.
But it was hollow. And in it, according to the man who wrote the book on this, Gerald O'Farrell, he says that the papyrus that was discovered inside those statues showed clearly that the story of Jesus Christ was based on anecdotes from the life of Tutankhamun.
Gosh.
In black and white that even an imbecile could recognize, the crucifixion included. Now, of course, we know that Tutankhamun only lived to 17 years of age, but before he was murdered, at 17, anecdotes in the life, the conflicts in his life, and various other anecdotes of his life, this document revealed clearly that this was, whoever had read this document, were very much involved in the writing of the story of Jesus, and that had to be suppressed, because that would cut at the roots of Judeo-Christianity as we know it. And therefore, the Rothschilds got in, the agents of the Rothschilds, Lady Rothschild. See, what people have to understand is this. Lord Carnarvon, who funded the digs,
right,
not only for the tomb of Tutankhamun, but for his brother and Nefertiti, and his henchman, Carter, the man who actually was the archaeologist.
Okay.
Lord Carnarvon's wife was the sister of the Rothschild dynasty. She was a Rothschild.
Gosh.
And it's Rothschild money that funded Lord Carnarvon. He sat on a pile of Rothschild money, and you know what happened? After they had emptied the tombs, the entire collection went into Rothschild keeping.
It's terrible, isn't it? It's disgusting.
A whole lot. Yeah, some went to this museum, some went to that museum, but it was under Rothschild auspices. Carnarvon and Carter were merely agents working for them.
Yeah, there really has been a major smokescreen, hasn't there, Michael?
You bet.
You know. Yeah, I was going to ask you in relation to, you know, the metaphysical aspect of the cult of light that you were speaking about earlier. It seems that, you know, it is basically an aim of manipulating the human consciousness and, you know, the nature of reality that we experience. Now, could you possibly kind of give us a bit of information on maybe some of the practices that allow for this manipulation to arise and take effect?
Well, this is an absolutely great question, because this has to do with the essence. See, it'll help people to understand what we're talking about if they understand that when you speak of the word atonism,
yeah,
they would know that word better as Luciferianism.
Okay.
Not in the sense of a devil running around with horns on his head, but Lucifer, the son of the morning, the sun in the sky. That might help us move down that road with more clarity. Number two, that light, nothing evil with light in itself. But my book was, one of the volumes is subtitled The Dark Side of the Sun.
Yeah.
Because we still have to grasp something about the nature of light, which has not been grasped by this world, because again, we tend to see light only as a positive thing. But light can be used to blind, light can be used to burn,
True.
and light can be used to conceal.
Yeah.
Because if somebody's shining a halogen light in your face, you're blinded and they're concealed. So in the ideology of these children of light, these princes, as I call them, princes of light, and by the way, that's one of their own terms.
Right.
These princes of light know exactly how to mind control you in a multiplicity of ways, and one of the age-old ways to do it is via light. It has certain occult properties, and it's been used on us ever since. The word light, the phenomena light, and if anyone wants to get free of the matrix of control, as I recommend over and over again in my work, they need to observe how light is used, not just in the cities, and it's left on all day and night in the high-rise buildings. They've got to watch how light is used in the schools, how light is used in the supermarkets, how light is used in the streets, how light is used specifically on television, and how images of light are used in billboards, magazines, and so forth and so on. Just observe that, and your life will change forever when you realize that light is being used as a weapon.
Yeah.
It's used in the Bible, it's identified with God, and of course it sets up a dichotomy, doesn't it? The moment that you're believing in anything to do with light, you're immediately opposing an opposite, which is darkness. So immediately a dualism has been erected. And if you're into a dualism, the next step, you won't probably notice that this is happening, but you might start even equating parts of your own mind with that darkness. Hey, you might even start thinking of the opposite sex, or the world, or nature, or animals. You see, once you've created this, and this is all going back to Akhenaton, when these guys did not even, as soon as the sun sank beneath the horizon, they went to bed.
Right.
And only when it rose up in the morning they were prepared to do their prayers. They were completely children of light. Now, psychologists will tell you that this is a total, absolute sign of megalomania. Because it's also a sign of hyper-extroversion. They know about what it means for the psyche. They know that this person is not dealing with their unconscious, not dealing with their body. These people are dealing only with their, what we would now express as the neocortex, the frontal lobes, waking consciousness, ego consciousness. If you read Akhenaton's own writings about the darkness and getting rid of the occult of Osiris and getting rid of the cult of Amun-Ra, suppressing women, not letting them, having no female cults anymore and all of this kind of thing, you suddenly come to understand that this man's megalomania, he was light possessed, light infatuated. He was a disciple of light. But not, as I say, the positive side of light, because the positive side of light was being used by previous cults where they had a balance. They had a balance of night and day, yin and yang, sun and moon, male and female. So that was a hallmark of the Amunism that came before. That doesn't mean that Amunism probably didn't have some reprehensible aspects, but that's found in all religions. But generally speaking, Amunism was far more balanced and far more balanced. In fact, they even had a triplicity, which I believe was inherited from the Druids, or what's known as the Shamsu-Hor, the disciples of Horus, these Western adepts who tutored the Egyptians in the earliest days of their dynasties, way, way back, thousands of years before Akhenaton came on the scene. Now, Akhenaton, throughout all of those, ostensibly got rid of dualism, which on paper sounds mighty good. because you're talking about the metaphysics of all of this. Yeah, on paper it sounds good to be dealing with the absence of dualism, but that's not what happens at all. The moment that you put the sun or light as the center of something, you're automatically creating the worst dualism conceivable.
Yeah.
You're simply disassociating. And in order to be able to do that, you yourself must be disassociated. And therefore everything you touch is going to be infected in that way.
It's fascinating information you're giving us here, Michael. It really is, because you know, I'm really fascinated with this whole concept of, you know, the light worship. And when I've heard you mention this dark side of the sun, it's something I've wanted to explore. You know, how you just elaborated, look around, you know, at the different lights within different environments and how they're being used. I think that piece of information there is imperative, you know, to all of us who are, you know, in this awakening and trying to basically get, you know, a grip on the overall scale of what's going on, not just on an external level, but more of a spiritual level, you know.
Oh, one can trace it, I think I mentioned in a couple of talks before, one can trace it with certain legitimacy, even to the word itself, light. It means two things. Right. And I tried to, partly as an experiment, and partly because it does echo my personal beliefs. If you take a lot of the conjectures and conclusions that we normally assume when we're talking about light as luminescence, but switch all those conclusions and statements about light over to the other meaning of the word light, which is lightness and weight. I believe personally, I mean, people have to do their own experiment with this, but I believe that spiritually, metaphysically, theologically, whatever way you want to look at it, all the rhetoric of light as luminescence make infinitely more sense when you speak of them as lightness. You see, rather than luminescence. I believe there's a huge metaphysical problem here. It's not that light worship is wrong. As I said, that there's a place for the sun. There's a place for that understanding. There's a beautiful aspect of that. And most solar cult, when I'm implicating atomism, I am not, like so many other scholars, implicating in a negative way all solar worship. I'm not. Yeah. Because, as I say, the Amanism and various aspects of Brahmanism, they have a much more balanced aspect. The Druids had a much more balanced concept here. They understood that, look, let me put it this way, and I did mention this anecdote in Volume 1. To a Druid, I mean, to all ancient people, when the sun rose on the horizon, it looked like an eye.
Okay.
Right? And it looked like the eye of God. That's why we call even a pupil in school a pupil, because the pupil means the center of your eye.
Yeah. Gosh.
Or we call a youngster, young star. Like the Father, he says, you are my young star, my young son. And son, S-O-N. You're the fruit of my loins. You're the son of me. I'm the God, I'm Amun-Ra, and you're my son, Horus, right? So you have all of these illusions. But when the sun rises on the horizon, it appears to be like a light in the sky, the light. But the Druids were very clever people. And they said, yes, we see the bounty of the light. We see that the sun is a reference to ego because it says, I alone dominate right now. I give you my light, and you see the world around you in great lucidity. But there's also another side to this. I have drawn a veil of light over the night sky, over the body of the goddess. My rising is wonderful and splendid, but as I rose, I also blotted out by my light. I concealed another theater of the mysteries. And then when I set in the west, suddenly my light effulgence is less, and suddenly the theater of the night opens up. And that's when you can study the stars, which were always considered in the body of God. You study those measurements, and then you learn about the geometry. You learn about prediction. You learn about something that God is trying to tell you through the looking of those stars. And then you sit around the fire, and that's where the stories start getting told. And that's where, you know, the bardic tradition comes from. People would sit around and play instruments and things. So the night was also considered very sacred, a thing of community, and certainly a thing of personal meditation as well. So the Druids were not just worshippers of light. They understood that, and they had their deities of light. But they also realized that light has a dual function, to not only reveal, but to conceal. Once you move along into the more atonistic, and I'm including Judeo-Christianity here,
Okay.
Or masonry. Look at the symbol. You can't find one symbol of masonry that doesn't have light beams coming out of it every place. Even the crown that they use, or the capital letter G, you always see the light coming out of these images. Once you become hyper-focused, once you become basically a disciple of light, you are, whether you like it or not, starting to become blinded to that other reality. Light for you is supremely only a revealer. You do not see that it conceals.
I'll see. Yeah, I mean, I really am blown away by this this talk today with you, Michael. It's really helping to connect the dots for us, you know. I did want to ask you, in terms of the Druids, you mentioned earlier about their mysteries, and it seems they were very much infiltrated, and that, as you say, the original knowledge was then taken and used for malevolent means. Could you give us a little bit of background on the Druids themselves and their practices for more of a positive means of self-development?
Well, of course, we've already pretty much nailed it down in the sense that they were holistic.
Okay.
The basic essence of Druidism, the word just means truth, or keeper of truth, or keeper of wisdom.
Yeah.
I think one of their primary functions, they had several functions. They thought of themselves as healers, because we know that Druids were very much into geomancy and measuring the earth, and putting up these standing stones, all those stone circles and megaliths. What was that all about? What did they bother doing that for? That was one of their functions, to heal the earth, because the earth had been through cataclysm.
Yeah.
And they were very much aware that the earth was a living entity, a living being. One might think of it as a goddess. So one of their duties that they assigned to themselves was to heal the earth and do it like a form of acupuncture by putting these stone circles at certain geomantic vortexes. The very act of doing that helped to galvanize the traumatized people.
Yeah.
They used to organize huge teams of people, because you don't have to go to Ireland and look at some of that Queen Maeve's tomb. You know that it's millions of pieces of tiny little pieces of stone. What on earth? That must have taken thousands of people to do that. Well, that's right, it did. They took hundreds and hundreds of people who were in a state of almost great trauma, and the Druid masters knew that if you get these people to go and pick up all the rocks and debris from all around the land and bring it to a central place that we've designated and place these stones here, it will actually have a positive psychological effect that galvanize the community again.
Yeah.
Right, they were very clever. And secondly, they also doing for the secondary purpose of geomancy. Put those stones there because this is going to help you heal the earth and balance out the vortex. So it was one major thing that they were involved in. Second to that, and part of that, was the understanding, the central metaphysics of them, was that there is no separation between your thinking, your mind, and the natural order of the universe. And therefore, since that is the case, you are not only the caretaker of the universe, you are its child. You are connected to it. And therefore, you're honor bound now to take instruction from nature.
Yeah.
Observe her seasons, observe the cycles, observe the individual plants and animals and their behavior. Later on, you can create metaphors of those. The zodiac is just a metaphor for that.
Okay.
When they say that Aries is a ram and that Taurus is a bull, that's just metaphor to teach ordinary people. Well, you see, you're a farmer. Look at the goat, or you're a fisherman. Look at the behavior of the fish.
Yeah.
People don't understand the esoteric aspect, but if you said that, look at the behavior of the lion. Do you see how proud he is? They could teach astrology just like you're teaching ABCs to a child. It's not that there's actual constellations that look like a lion. That was just a metaphor to teach. And then, of course, the Druids were even smarter than that. They knew they weren't teaching you about the external zodiac. They were teaching you about consciousness. They were teaching you about what I refer to as the inner zodiac in my work. So it was 3 or 4 different levels working at the same time. They were the tutors of the world. They were the archivists of the world. One group of the Druids, known as the Bards, were the memorizers. These people had to memorize the lineage of every nobleman who lived in their country. Every king who ruled, every chieftain, and every nobleman. Those guys were illiterate. They didn't have any kind of written down trees, family trees or lineage. They called in the bard who knew it all by memory. Going back generations, they could tell you who you were related to, the stories of those people. And by the way, when the Atenists through these Romans came in, and later through Henry II, when they came to England, when they invaded Ireland, did you know that the very first people they targeted was the bards, these people who gained this, who these people who had this knowledge of the lineage of the indigenous people, the indigenous kings, were all slaughtered in a period less than 100 years.
Gosh.
I actually think it was less than 20 or something like that. It was a mass genocide targeted to get rid of the Bards because they were the ones who held the secret history of Ireland, including the lineage of the kings going back to ancient times.
Mm.
So the genocide, I actually point to the genocide of the Irish Druids as one of the earliest, if not the earliest, genocide in the history of our world. And I liken it to the well-known genocide that happened in Mexico and in South America with Cortez and Pizarro when they went over and murdered the Incas and the Aztecs. That's on record.
Yeah.
But a similar, equivalent, if not even worse, genocide, which is almost a footnote in books on the Celts, doesn't even. Julius Caesar wrote more on it than modern scholars write on it.
Mm.
Right? The man who did the killing has written more on it than you'll find in most books written since the 1920s.
It really does say something, doesn't it, about the world we're living in, Michael, you know.
What a genocide. And the Irish, what the hell does it matter how many of them die? They're killing themselves anyway. Yeah, now they are because they don't know what they're asked from their elbow.
Mm.
This is a devastated, raped people who don't even know that their own land is a temple.
Yeah.
A butchered psyche will do exactly what you've been seeing since 1690 and before. A butchered, like they say, your fate becomes your reality. You think negatively, you think murderously, you think sadistically, you're going to invite that right to your doorstep. The very people in your life, the very incidents that turn up in your existence are going to be a manifestation of your consciousness. Well, no psyche is more raped from the dawn of time than the Irish psyche. That's why that country is riddled with blood. And those scum-sucking pigs over there in the Windsor family and the Alpha Lodges of British Freemasonry, they know what that's all about. They know. You can look at their symbolism. You can look at their treatment of the Irish. You can see in their attitude towards them that this is a sacrificial offering on the altar of their Luciferian teachings. They also do it through the Vatican, through the Jesuit power that controls the backbone of Ireland, controls the emotions and the psyche of the Irish people who believe in that rubbish. Right? The Jesuit Catholic thing is the way to get hold of their psyche because they know that the Irishman is a romantic who loves the earth, who's a deep spiritual core. He's not just an intellectual person. He's got a strong spiritual, deep connection to the earth and deep connection to soul. So how are you going to co-opt that? How are you going to, you take down the round towers, you take down the stone circles, you rape Tara, you rape the land, you get rid of all the Druidic images, you put your Christian saints in place of them. You actually take the names of ancient pagan gods and you put in their place Christian saints that never even biologically existed, but they're just fabrications of the Vatican. And then you put in your Jesuit coterie, nothing more than hardcore Atenists out of Rome. They're all employed by what we would know as the Templars. The Knights Templar are instrumental in all of this, by the way. It's the Knights Templars who are you asked earlier about the corruption of the Druids and their knowledge.
Yeah.
It's the Knights Templar families, the Merovingian dynasty, that goes back all the way to the Atenists. I have shown a direct connection, by way of the Priory de Zion, the Knights Templars, the Freemasons, and the Orange Lodge in Northern Ireland. And even the so-called Republican lodges, they're all in cahoots. There's no, on paper you got Protestant versus Catholic. They're laughing their heads off that you believe that. In the lodge, they're holding hands. The Jesuits of the South, the so-called Republican movement, and the Orange men at the North, the so-called Protestant movement, behind the lodge door, they're one. Yeah.
And everybody in that sense from both parties are kind of working towards this new world order, aren't they?
Yeah, with their insider smiles. Can't believe how easy it is to duplicate, of course, trauma. They used it thousands of years ago, they use it today. Trauma is the easiest thing, and it's happening right now. The trauma of the so-called recessions and the meltdowns. And if you go back at any period of history, they're always doing it. You can roll back and hear politicians from the 1800s and the 1920s and 1950s and 1960s. They're saying the exact same words as they say today. Oh, things are getting better. Oh, we have to tighten our belts. We just have to get through this next period. Doesn't anybody hear the stuck record?
Yeah, I think people are beginning to, aren't they?
They finally are, because it's just becoming a joke. And there's so many insiders now blowing the whistle.
Yeah.
There is definitely a move forward. People are getting this knowledge together. They're getting the pattern recognition together. And the blatancy of it is a little bit too extravagant because they've given us so much rhetoric of talismanic words about diversity and global unity and the peace for all mankind and the war to end all other wars and all of this other rubbish, and nothing ever comes real of it except worse meltdown than before.
Yeah. Michael, the term New World Order, could you tell us a little bit about the etymology of that term?
Well, officially it's meant to come from Ovid or some Latin writer. Of course, I know in my work that is an old term that alludes to this New World Order. Remember we spoke about that Akhenaton's clan, after they had lost Egypt, the world would not be enough. So the world disorder that they experienced,
right?
They were exiled.
Yeah.
We said that the Hyksos, of which I believe these people were probably descendants, they were expelled several hundred years before by Amos. But Akhenaton himself, because of his terrible, vindictive, just unbelievably tyrannous actions, Egypt rose up and threw him out. History books think he just falls off the map. They still haven't found his grave, so they assume he died. His daughter, as I said, and her coterie end up in Ireland, if you want to believe the ancient legends. And of course, as I said, they had many patrician family friends, not only in other regions of Egypt, but in Babylon, and in Greece, and in Rome, and in many other European countries. And they make their way across Spain to Ireland.
Yeah.
The center of Ireland was to be destroy the Druids, take their knowledge, and then set up a new world order out of the disorder that was characteristic of what happened to them in Egypt.
Right.
Of course, it does allude to other forms of disorder, like even cataclysm and what have you, and these famines, but it mostly has to do with the toppling of their dynasty. And that is why you find in the artwork that they produce, in many Masonic diadems and Masonic images, you'll find a broken column, or a pyramid without a capstone, or some other a crown that has fallen.
Okay.
In chess, you find the king you see that falls.
Oh, yeah.
I can't tell you how many allusions there are throughout mythology and stories, and even in other areas you wouldn't first connect, where there is this image of the broken crown or the broken king, and these are allusions to the Pharaoh Akhenaton losing his crown.
Yeah.
And that crown will one day be, restored again. Do you remember in British heraldry, you always see the lion and the unicorn?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It just jumps to mind because that's an Atenist symbol. The lion is always a symbol of the royal Atenists. That means Atenists, but the royals.
Right. Okay.
That's a Judaic. It's a traditional. When we realize that Judaic equals Atenism, Atenists, then we understand. So the lion is the tutelary symbol of the pharaoh. In fact, I think some of the pharaoh's garb even used to use a lion's tail at the back.
Right.
In his apron or something. They always identified the lion with the emperor himself, the pharaoh. You often see images of him on his chariot, shooting the lions, right? The opposite side is the pale unicorn. The pale unicorn is the moon.
Right.
Well, you can look at it in cosmological terms as the lion represents Leo, the sun. The pale white unicorn represents Cancer, the next house, the pale house of the moon. One is masculine, red. The red lion is masculine. The white unicorn is the feminine.
Yeah.
But they stand up together looking at each other because one serves the other. To come to explain it properly is that both wear a crown, but you'll notice that the crown on the unicorn is not on the head but down the neck, like it's slipped.
Yeah.
And often on the unicorn, 9 times out of 10, you'll actually see that the unicorn is chained.
Okay.
Yeah, it has a chain running from the crown or from its neck to the main heraldic symbol there.
So it's all. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, that's just to explain that the servants of the Atenists, because remember, any small royal coterie has one flaw, one weakness. They're too few. They can't operate on their own. So the whole matrix of control, the architecture of control, relies on lieutenants. So in short, what I'm saying is that the royal line that you find on the crests of King Richard the Lionheart, or the Merovingian dynasties, wherever you see that blinking thing in Trafalgar Square, I don't care where you see that symbol.
Yeah.
That symbol is often shown at the stately homes and at the portals of stately homes and what have you. That represents the elite, the top level brass. But they're nobody without their little lieutenants. And the white unicorn is the servant. But he doesn't wear the crown, he's chained.
Yeah.
His allegiance is only contingent upon that he keeps doing what he does. So these Jesuits, these Zionists, all of the Masons, the lower level Masons, these are people who run by this unicorn. They are the servants. They reflect the light of the sun. They reflect the light of the Atnas leaders in exactly the same way as the moon reflects the sun. Right? So it's a very important image here. The lion and the unicorn, representing the ones who give the orders and the ones who execute them.
It's fascinating. I mean,
well, look at Welcome. Just to give you another how this filters down into society. If you start seeing a massive corporation like the massive pharmaceutical corporation, Welcome, they have a black horse or a black unicorn as their symbol. Connect that. Start connecting the unicorn company, unicorn corporation, unicorn telecommunications, unicorn newspapers, unicorn media. Start thinking what these terms mean. Red lion. White lion. Right? Lion Services, Lion Corporation, Lion Films, Lion Heart, Lion Gate, British Lion.
Gosh, the list goes on.
Yeah, then you understand why the world looks like the way it does. I'm not implicating everybody who uses that name, but we've got to understand that these corporate entities are telling you something. Pyramid, Pinnacle. My God, the list goes on.
I mean, you mentioned a little bit earlier about, they haven't officially found Akhenaton's tomb. Is this, I mean, are they aware of where it is? Or, I mean, there was something else I wanted to ask you, actually, that kind of brings that into the forefront of my mind in regards to the possibility that, are you familiar with Freeman's work?
Vaguely, yeah.
Right, he kind of brings the concept that maybe Barack Obama could be a clone of Akhenaton, that his genes had been preserved in order to bring him back at this time, you see. What's your take on that, mate?
I think that's too way out for me, but what I will say is that, first, there are biological descendants. I would give that. But I would say that since that's almost unprovable, one has to reserve that and say, let's look at these ministers as ideologically connected. I think that's your safe bet. To keep pushing the biological is a little bit ridiculous, because if that even exists, it will only be in the most highest level Freemasons, the highest level royals. I would have to stop there, because at that point, anyone, you have to understand that these Obamas, they are at such an incredibly low level of the pyramid. And are so expendable and disposable that it is almost impossible for them to be biologically connected. I don't rule it out, but in my reading of it, it's absolutely unlikely. They're so low down on the chain of command. They're like the big toe of the body politic, So I would say that anyone with a biological connection is further up the ladder. That does not rule out that there are these dynastic connections. I've gone, like David ICAN has gone breathless, gone blue in the face, trying to show that the American presidents and the American dignitaries are all interconnected. That whole thing about how 34 of the presidents or whatever is blood related to each other, and the Queen of England and all of that. But that can be explained not by it's one thing to say that they are all interrelated and bloodline. It's a different thing to say that they're related to Akhenaton from the 1400 BC.
I can see what you're saying there. I just thought I would ask your take on that, and you've shedded, a bit of light on that, so cheers for that, mate. Thanks. You there?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I thought we'd lost you there for a minute. We've had a couple of little technical hiccups throughout the talk, you see, like cutting in and out of the sound, but...
Oh, I see.
But I think overall you can hear through them. You can hear what's being said, so it's no issue. That's just about all we've got time for today, folks. Michael, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you with us and to speak a little bit about these topics. It really is an honour to have you on ICANplanet.com, mate.
Well, let's do it again. I enjoyed the questions. I think every single question you asked was really spot on, and you have a deep understanding of these issues. It really stands out. So, congratulations, Matthew. I'm glad that, it's your second interview, and I feel proud about that. And, definitely keep me involved and informed in what you're doing, and